Right, I think we'll get started, and anyone at late joiners can join as they will. Good morning, everyone. My name's Krista Linnell. I'm the marketing manager for Comtec Translations. Thank you so much for joining. Just a few housekeeping from me, and then I'll put my video off and let James get started. First of all, please feel free to use the chat functionality to chat and connect with anyone else on the webinar. We'll use the Q&A functionality as well, and we'll get to the Q&A at the end of the webinar. This webinar is being recorded and will be on our website in a week or so. We will also circulate that recording to you. So without further ado, I will hand over to James.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Krista. Good morning, everyone. It's so great to see so many people here bright and early to learn all about transcreation. I'm just going to share my screen. I've prepared some slides for us all. Perfect. So thank you very much for joining us today for our webinar all about transcreation of international campaigns, the winning formula. So transcreation is a little bit different from translation and can often be, pardon a bit of a languages pun, a bit of a foreign concept for lots of people. And we work with a lot of marketing agencies, a lot of marketing teams who often ask us, what is transcreation? When do I need it? What will it do? So we thought, what better way to help answer some of these questions to our audience than organise a webinar and invite everyone along. And it's great to see so many people here today to learn about what transcreation is and how it can enhance your international campaigns and deliver some great results for your business. I'm really looking forward to sharing the knowledge that I've gained throughout my career with you all today. So just to introduce myself and Comtec quickly. So my name is James Brown. I'm head of commercial at Comtec Translations. I've worked in the translation industry for over 10 years now, and I work very closely with a lot of my clients who are marketers, marketing teams and marketing agencies, and offering advice and support to them all about transcreation, putting in place a great process and best practice really to help them achieve the best results. In terms of Comtec as a business, we are a full service translation agency based in Leamington Spa in the UK. We've been around for 40 years, and throughout that time we've supported clients with effective multilingual communication in over 250 languages. So that's enough about me. What are we going to learn today? So first of all, we're going to answer the big question, what is transcreation? Secondly, we're going to look at why businesses should consider transcreation when planning an international campaign. We're also going to look at the process. So how do you actually practically transcreate marketing content? We're also going to look at what success looks like. And I'm actually going to show you 3 examples from iconic brands and how they've successfully translated their slogans for overseas markets to make them just as memorable and impactful in the target cultures as in the original. We're also going to look at some ROI that businesses can expect to achieve if they invest and transcreate successfully. And finally, I'll share my top tips for transcreation for you to take away from today. So before we delve into agenda, I'm just going to repeat the housekeeping items Krista mentioned earlier in case for anyone that's joined since. So please feel free to share any questions at any time throughout the webinar in the chat area. We are going to have time for Q&A towards the end, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have. And also the webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website in the next couple of weeks. So we look forward to sharing that with you. Right, let's begin. So first things first, before I start explaining all about transcreation, I'm really interested in learning what you all know about transcreation already. So in the chat, it will be great if everyone could perhaps share a few words that spring to mind when you think of the term transcreation. And if you've actually handled transcreation already as part of your role, it will be great to, again, hear from you about any experiences you've had with transcreation, how it went, any challenges you've experienced, and hopefully we can solve some of those today. So I'll give you a minute or so to answer those, and yeah, let's see what everyone comes up with. So what does everyone think about transcreation then? What is a word that springs to mind when you hear the term transcreation?
Feel free to use the Q&A as well. If I'm not sure if we're having a problem with the chat functionality, but I can see some coming through on the Q&A.
Oh, brilliant. We've got a great suggestion from Marcella. Relevant. Yes, transcreation is very important. It helps bring cultures together through multi-channel communication and really helps businesses engage with their local markets. Thank you for that really great idea. I would also say personally, it's creativity. It's definitely going beyond just translation as we know it. So I'm looking forward to sharing some of those things today. Keeping the original intent of the copy story. Thank you very much, Elaine. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Transcreation is an art form, and it's taking the original intent and idea and putting it into words for the local market, rather than just translating it word for word, which might not always land from a marketing perspective. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for those contributions. Let's have a look at the definition of transcreation. So, transcreation is essentially an advanced form of localization which combines translation skills, cultural awareness, language, and creative license to adapt content while preserving the meaning of the original intent behind it and keeping that in play for the new region and target audience. Essentially, it's a translation of ideas, not just words. Transcreation is very much about language, but, and perhaps more fundamentally so, it's actually more about culture and connecting two cultures. It's considering who your target audience are and how their culture operates differently from your own. Essentially, a trans creator will take your brand, your ideas, your messages, and all the intent behind them and bring these to life for the target audience by putting them into words that really speak to them and elicit the emotional response you want them to feel, all as well as being in their language and culturally appropriate and suitable for them. That's transcreation in a nutshell. It's all about ideas, emotion, culture, and language. So, why do we need transcreation? Big question here again. As mentioned before, transcreation is all about language, but it's fundamentally about culture. So when launching an international marketing campaign, it's essential to ensure that your translated comms are just as tailored to your local audiences as the original content you've written is tailored for the original market. Every culture is different, and that goes much beyond what people eat, what people like to watch on television, how people dress. It's fundamentally how people operate on a basic level. So taking the time to fully invest in transcreation as part of your international marketing strategy and really capturing, getting into the head of the people in your target audience and putting that into words via transcreation is really ensuring you're going to engage fully with your target audience. Transcreation actually also has huge benefits from a business perspective. Over the past few years, Comtec have actually been working alongside the Association of Translation Companies and Aston Business School to undertake a study looking at the impact of languages on international business. The results of this study were published last year in what we call the Lock 30 report, and we found that SMEs, or any business really, embracing language capabilities are 30% more successful in exporting than those which do not. And a big part of this was looking at companies investing in translation and transcreation localization for their content to really engage with their target audiences. So that's a great start. You can be 30% more successful than competitors if you invest in translation and transcreation. So really exciting here for your international marketing strategies. So next big question, we've got lots of questions today we're answering. When should you consider translation? So we've now talked about the definition and why it's so important, but let's look at some practical stuff here. Before you get started with any international marketing campaign, it's important to consider what level of localization you need for your content. There is no one-size-fits-all approach. Having worked in this industry for 10 years, I always find that every single project is absolutely different and it needs thinking time to work out what is best for each client, each piece of content and their audience as well. What I would always recommend whenever you're working out what kind of approach you need for your content is to consider several things. It's considering your business objectives. So what are you trying to achieve from this campaign or even this specific piece of content? What do you want it to do for you? Who is your target audience? And what is the level of impact, emotional resonance, engagement you want to elicit from them? That's all really, really important information. The purpose, the why, that then informs the how. We would always recommend sharing this information with your translation partner at the beginning of a briefing stage. This will enable them to offer the most suitable solution for you and also recommend associated timescales, costs and process for the option that's going to suit you best. Now on the screen, you can probably see lots of text. Don't get too overwhelmed. This is Comtec's localization spectrum, and it's something we use internally to help us support our customers with choosing the right piece of the right approach for their content. As you can see, there are loads of different translation solutions. We have machine solutions, we have human solutions, and we have conceptual solutions. To the left-hand side of the screen, you can see more about different levels of machine solutions, which are primarily reserved for content types where accuracy and understanding are pivotal for the purpose. The only really area in a marketing perspective that any machine solutions can really support is in e-commerce, where it can help with cost and time scale improvements for when you're creating loads of different product descriptions, that sort of thing. But for most marketing content, we would always recommend starting with human solutions and working upwards depending on various factors. Again, the more tailored, the more impact, the more engaging you wish your content to be for the local target audience, that is when we recommend more of a transcreation approach. So what kinds of content types do we often see transcreation is needed for? Essentially, to keep it easy to remember, its main usage is for short and snappy content where you want to really grab the attention of your audience. So this can include content featured on posters or adverts. Brand slogans is a brilliant way of content piece to consider transcreation for, to really make sure the essence of your brand is put across in the target audience. And also things like website banners. When a customer clicks on a website, you want to grab attention straight away. Similarly, blog titles, article titles, headlines, subtitles featuring in brochures, catalogs, where you really want to grab attention, and these are perfect things for transcreation. It's also really useful for longer pieces of content, especially marketing content, especially when the content is perhaps more tailored to the original market. There's lots of idioms in there, there's lots of creative wordplay, there might be some cultural references, and it really needs to land in the target market. What we often find is when we're working with customers for marketing content, we recommend a mix and match approach. For some bits of content, you'll need transcreation. For some bits of content, you'll need translation. And for some, you need a hybrid approach, which is kind of a midway point between translation and transcreation. So we always like to mix and match and make sure we're recommending the best approach for our customers that's fully tailored for their needs. So how do we practically transcreate? So I'm giving you away some secrets here. So I'm going to tell you, just to help you understand what the transcreation process looks like from start to finish, and how you, as businesses, can support your translation partner to really kind of make sure we're doing the best we can for you. So as part of the transcreation process, I've broken this down into kind of 3 core stages. We have the briefing stage, the transcreation stage, and the final stage, which I've called finalization because I couldn't think of a better word for it. So I'm going to talk you through those three and talk about some of the things that are included. So with translation and transcreation, at its core, it's essentially written content. So it's a really subjective solution, just as subjective as writing the original marketing content is. So stage one, it's really important to make sure that everyone is on the same page. So the briefing stage is perhaps the most critical of all three of these stages. What we would recommend is take the time to brief your translation partner on a wide range of things. What they'll be doing is selecting specialist transcreators to help craft your content, and the more information you can give them, the more information they can share with their team. So what we would recommend is provide, in this case, I'll use the example of a brand slogan. So provide your translation partner with the original slogan, along with a creative briefing. So all the information regarding how you came up with that slogan in the first place is really useful. It helps us get into the mind of your marketing team so we can take your ideas and messaging and transcreate them across for your target culture. Any information about your brand as well is really useful. If you have brand guidelines, if you have style guidelines, any existing translations you've done before, that's also really useful. We also want to make sure we're representing you as a company, as well as the idea behind the slogan and the campaign. And finally, about the target audience, any information you can share about the target audience is great. For example, buyer personas, market research, any previous campaigns you've had where it's perhaps performed really well or perhaps hasn't performed so well. All this information is really, really useful for your translation partner to receive ahead of getting started. We'd always recommend, if possible, taking the time to organise a briefing call. We often find with more creative content, putting it into words verbally, you can really see the emotion behind the words, and it helps everyone get into spirit of the project. But we'd also recommend sharing all the content as well in written format, so the linguist can keep referring back to that throughout the process. Stage two is about the transcreation itself. And as I mentioned before, it takes into account language, culture, and emotion. What we would generally do is assign a specialist transcreator, who is a specialist creative linguist who specializes in creative translation, to essentially craft, in the event of a slogan, various transcreated slogans for you to review. As part of this process, they want to make sure your brand messaging is kept alive, your brand is represented in terms of keeping the spirit of your brand, and also we've got the target audience in mind and your objectives. As part of this, I'll do some research. So they will review all the materials you've shared, as well as perhaps researching more about your brand and the target audience. They'll then craft several ideas for you that could potentially work. They'll then, after a brainstorming approach, they'll start transcreating. And then what we always like to do is assign a second linguist to proofread their work. It's always useful with creative content to kind of have a second pair of eyes look over it, just to see if there's anything that they perhaps missed or not thought of, and then they will kind of work together as a team to tweak that and make it ready to go. The last stage is really important, and it's all about collaboration, really. With transcreation, especially for short form content like slogans, headlines, we will often provide multiple options. So we like to give our clients the freedom of choice rather than just provide one translation. We'll usually give them of at least three. The translator might think of more. And of course, if you want loads, we can certainly provide those as well. Along with these options, we'll provide back translation, so you can literally see in English what it says, along with a commentary. Now, the commentary is usually written in English, and it helps to explain the transcreation choices. So how have we taken the original slogan and put it into this language for this target audience? What we then do is provide this to you, and then what we'd recommend is any local stakeholders review this internally and provide some feedback. Really, we like to give you the power of choice, so you can then choose which option you like the best. If perhaps there's some feedback you'd like to share, that might not be exactly right, or you really like the start of one, but you're looking for something to be tweaked slightly. We'd recommend sharing as much feedback as possible. It's usually in Transcreation, it does take a couple of rounds of feedback to get it 100% right, but that's the aim of the game with creative content. So the more feedback you can share with us, the better. And at the end of the day, it gets you your company's exact brand slogan you're looking for. So now we've talked about the process, what Transcreation is and what it does. Let's have a look at what success looks like. So as I mentioned at the start, I want to talk you through 3 real life examples of successful Transcreation of brand slogans. I think looking at brand slogans is really clever because they're so memorable, and I think it's a really good way of showing how memorable Transcreation can make your brand. So first of all, I'm going to look at McDonald's. So you may remember the very catchy McDonald's slogan, "I'm loving it," which has a little catchy theme music alongside it as well. And I think this is a really good example, looking at across 3 languages where cultural differences come into play. So on the screen, we've got the UK, we've got Brazil in the middle, and we've got Germany to the right-hand side. In the British example, it's "I'm loving it." So as you can see, this is quite a colloquial, laid-back, friendly way of saying that they like McDonald's, essentially. Now, for our culture, for British culture, and also kind of other Anglo-Saxon cultures like America, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, this lends itself really well to the culture. But when you look at other languages, it's slightly different. So in the middle, we've got the Brazilian Portuguese example, which I'm not going to pronounce that because I can't speak Brazilian Portuguese, but as a literal translation, it says, "I very much love all of this." Now, you can see here this is quite different. Whereas the English version is quite laid back, the Brazilian version is much more expressive. And that totally encapsulates Latin American culture and language. You've got the intensifier, "I very much love all of this" in there. It really reflects the style of Latin American language. And conversely, on the right-hand side, we have the German, which is "Ich liebe es." Now, that is very literal, "I love it." And again, that really reflects the German language in terms of its construction, and it's a more direct translation there. So I thought that was really clever how they've done that. They've got the same message across, but in 3 different ways that match the language and the culture. I've also got an example here from Apple, and this was the slogan for when the iPod Shuffle was released. I think that was probably about 12 years ago now, so quite a long time ago. And for British or American audiences, the slogan was "Small Talk." So why does small talk work really well for an iPod Shuffle? So first of all, the iPod Shuffle is physically small. It's a tiny version of the iPod, so you get this small across there. It also technically talks. It plays music. And secondly, small talk is a concept in British culture, English culture. Small talk is a thing. So there's definitely a play on words there that they've captured. In the other languages, I've got examples from Spain and also French Canadian on the screen. The Spanish is "Ya sabe hablar," which essentially translates to "it already knows how to talk." So in this instance, they've actually used another phrase that's quite common in their culture. So this particular phrase is essentially what parents or people say when they comment on young children being able to speak at a very early age. So again, they've used a phrase that's well known in the country, and they're also referencing the fact that it speaks, but also using a phrase used for children. You're also getting across the smallness of the idea there as well. In the French Canadian version, we've got "Petit parleur, grand faiseur," which is "it says a little, does a lot." Where it means "says a little," it means you've got the grammatical repetition there of grand parleur, petit parleur, grand faiseur. So grammatically, they've made it really short and snappy to remember and say. But the real meaning is it's a physically small thing that speaks, but it does a lot. Again, that gets across the idea of what the iPod Shuffle does. So again, that's a really clever way there, and they've kind of how they've conceived that to for their language without taking away from the meaning of the original. And finally, let's look at Haribo. Now, we all know the song "Kids and Grown-ups Love It So," the happy word of Haribo. Now, what I love about this one is essentially that's a well-known tune or song that is used in so many adverts. So there's added complexity here because Haribo have had to create essentially a version of that tune in other languages. And for German and Italian, these are two really good examples where they've actually made it rhyme. So I'm going to say the German, Haribo macht Kinder froh und Erwachsene ebenso. There's a little rhyme there. And when you look at the back translation, Haribo makes children happy and adults too. So again, you've got the, it's very similar to the original meaning as well. And finally, the Italian, I can't speak Italian, so I'm not going to try and pronounce this, but it translates directly to Haribo's are goodness that can be tasted at any age. So again, they've taken the idea and where it's not a direct translation, they've made it rhyme, they've made it match the original as best as possible. And obviously Haribo is a really iconic brand. And I think these three examples really show the power of transcreation and how clever it is as a solution. Perfect. So a couple of last things from me. I want to kind of share some of the return investment you can get by investing in transcreation. So first of all, by taking the time to invest in transcreation and putting in place a great process with your transcreation partner, you're going to optimize your content. It means you're going to avoid a lengthy process. It means you're going to avoid nasty surprises in terms of delivery times and costs. It also means you're going to get much better quality of transcreation by working with your partner and putting a process in place like the one I demonstrated earlier. In terms of your local markets as well, we'd really recommend when transcreation arises is encouraging collaboration with any local market teams you have. This helps get their buy-in, and any feedback we get from them is really important to make sure that we are getting it spot on for their markets and essentially making sure you perform better as a business. And finally, with a refined and culturally focused translation process, you're going to get better engagement from your local markets, taking the time to invest in transcreation as opposed to a more faithful translation and really getting into that culture, making it appropriate for them. In the long term, this is going to improve your brand reputation, increase your sales, and help grow your company. So, to leave you with something to take away, I've got 5 top transcreation tips for you to take away. So, number 1, make sure you're considering culture when developing your marketing strategy. So at the very start of any international marketing campaign, think about the target cultures and how you're going to tailor your content to suit them. Ask your transcreation partner for advice as well on how you can do that. For example, at Comtec, we offer cultural awareness workshops and one-to-one sessions to kind of support our marketing clients understand their target cultures. So always consider culture at the start. It will help you no end with making sure your comms land in market. Secondly, make sure you're sharing detailed briefs with your transcreation partner. Again, the more information you're able to share at the start, the better the transcreation process will be, because we can really make sure that the spirit of your brand and your intent and your objectives are met in any transcreations we do for you. Next, allow time for transcreation. Transcreation does take time. It's very different from translation. In a translation, where it's a more faithful translation, we always say, 1,500 words per working day in terms of turnaround time. Transcreation is so much different. Very small pieces of content, like slogans, can take days to come up with. So it's best your translator will keep wanting to go back to them to kind of make sure it's perfect. So make sure you are allowing time when you need transcreation. I'd recommend a week at least, even for small bits of content like that. Budget as well. Transcreation tends to be more expensive than translation because it takes into account thinking time as well, rounds of amends, that sort of thing, different options. So again, make sure you're allowing some budget for that. And finally, encourage collaboration with your local stakeholders for any translation project, but particularly transcreation of marketing content. Any feedback from local teams is important. At the end of the day, it helps them get what they want. So if there's any support they need, we can certainly help with that as well. Oh, sorry. One last thing. I know we're going to share this webinar around, but we've also got a couple of useful guides on our website as well. We have one called A Meeting of Creative Minds. and we have one called Delivering Effective Multilingual Marketing Campaigns. These are chock full of tips on transcreation and international marketing content translation. So please go through and check those out as well if you're interested. Great, and that brings me to the end of my presentation. Does anybody have any questions at all they'd like to ask me?
Yes, feel free to use the question and answer functionality. I've had a few questions, James, come direct to me, but I'll wait and see if anyone else wants to put any questions to the group for a few minutes. It's so interesting seeing the Haribo translation.
It's fascinating. I always find I really want to share that example because they've had to kind of create a rhyme as well, which I think all extra layer of complexity. So I always think transcreation is fascinating, and I think like looking at the slogans, it really brings it to life and helps illustrate what transcreation is really clearly. So looking at things like the McDonald's one as well, where it's I'm loving it, it's a bit of a jingle. I think that's always it always helps to kind of and they're so memorable as well. They're so memorable.
Well, guys, please feel free to use the Q&A functionality, but I'll get going with the two that I've had direct to me. James, I've had one that was, how long does transcreation take?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I touched on it briefly a couple of minutes ago, but transcreation can be quite slow. It's a totally different approach to translation. So where translation is taking content and translating it more faithfully, transcreation is all about thinking. So while your translation partner might quote, let's say, just a few hours for the transcreation work, the transcreator is more likely than not going to do that over a few days. Again, like with marketing content and creating that, they'll probably want to spend some time doing it, look at it again and with a fresh pair of eyes the next day, go back to it. They've also want to do some research at the start as well. To make sure they've really understood the brand. So what I would probably recommend in terms of a good approach is allowing an initial day for briefing. So if there's a briefing call or any briefing information that can be shared with the translation partner, we always try and get the linguist on any briefing calls as well. So they're hearing it from our clients, not Chinese whispers. We'd recommend a day for kind of briefing. If we're looking at maybe like 2 or 3 slogans or something along those lines, I'd probably recommend 3 days. Giving the initial transcreator kind of a couple of days to have a go, come back to it, make sure they're happy with their work, and then another day for proofreading as well. So another linguist looking at it, giving them some feedback, and the two of them discussing together. We like to put the linguist in touch so they can share ideas. It's always really useful with creative work. And then after that, once we've delivered, that's I guess 3 to 4 days. Once we've delivered the translation options for them, I'd probably recommend showing up with your local markets for some feedback and review. So that could perhaps take, in my experience, it could take anything from like 1 to 3 working days if I can get that sorted. So while the content itself is probably really, really short, like 1 sentence, those things take the longest to translate. So I'd always say buy more, create more time for that. It's different than translating social media posts or e-commerce product descriptions where they're much faster. These little high impact things, I'd always say bear as much time as possible.
Brilliant. And we've had one question from Elaine. Do you find transcreation is more for B2C or just as needed for B2B too?
Brilliant question. I would say both. I would absolutely say both. I think a lot of the examples I've given are B2C, and I think there's so many really good examples of slogans and things like that. And I know we've, for example, done some translations for television shows in the past or books where we've had to kind of transcreate titles and things like that and things. So I would definitely say B2B is we get so many requests from B2B for it as well. At the same time, you have products to sell to your businesses, and while it might not be as, let's say, flashy as B2C work, it's still got to engage with the local market. So we often work with B2B brands with who are doing websites, for example. There's still things on there that need to grab attention for marketing purposes. So things like website banners, their slogans. We did a health and safety campaign a while ago for a B2B brand, but it was all around health and safety for their internal teams, and that needed to be transcreated. And that was for internal staff. But we really had to kind of, there was a whole slogan and a whole approach. They'd really created a really nicely crafted campaign in English for their employees, but it had to really land because it was such a serious subject matter, but it also had to they understood the importance of it. So yeah, it's equally as important. And we would always advise when you need it.
Yeah, good to know. And then one question direct to me, which is, when should I start thinking about transcreation?
Yeah, great question. I think with transcreation, the earlier the better. What I would always say is, with transcreation, it comes down to culture. So when you're doing an international marketing strategy, or if you're launching a new campaign, think about culture at the very start. And with your translation partner, get them involved, ask them for advice, and say, we produce this kind of content. Do you think it might need this? What do you think it might need tailoring for the local market? They'll be able to give you loads of advice. They have access to, in our example, we have access to 2,000, 3,000 global linguists. So we can easily ask advice from the people based in market for you. So what I would say, think about it at the very start. The later you leave it, I have had in the past clients that have required transcreation work of slogans or campaigns, and we've only had a week's notice. There's not much you can do in that time in terms of beyond getting an accurate, high quality translation to them. Yes, it will be accurate and high quality as always, but we might not have had the time to really consider the local market. For example, there might be lots of content in the content, bits of content within the content itself that are so tailored at the local market. The original market. It's going to take time to transcreate across. So I think the earlier you think about it, the better. I think even things like even giving 2 or 3 weeks notice is really helpful with any creative work. It just makes sure that the translation partner can carry out all the briefing process and make sure they've got the right linguists in place as well to support you, the right process, the right briefing materials, so we can put this all in place and make sure it runs smoothly. So yeah, it's a bit totally different. It's a bit different to normal translation stuff, but yeah, the earlier the better with anything creative, creative marketing content.
And then just one from me. Do you find that most of our clients already know what transcreation is, or is there a bit of sort of education that's needed when they don't realise that they need transcreation?
Yeah, it's so funny you've asked that. I think it's a really good point. I often find that transcreation is one of those words that's been kind of thrown out there that a lot of people don't know what it really means. It sounds exciting, I think, the word transcreation. Yeah. And I think a lot of the time it's not 100% explained. For example, we get lots of clients who come to us saying, I need transcreation. And when we look at their content, they absolutely don't. We'll be ripping them off if we charge them, if we carry out transcreation for them. There are some clients also that come to us and they say, I need this next day. And we're like, we can give you something next day, but it's absolutely not going to be anything good enough for what you need it for. Yeah. That's where, especially marketing stuff, it needs the time to really make sure it's going to land. So there is a lot of education. I think within the industry, there's education as well, because translation is so fluid. There's lots of different approaches. So I think it's best not to be rigid with it. The term transcreation does exist, but I think what I always like to do is look at the content for my clients and make sure, yes, this is what it needs. Again, as I think I said earlier, like if I've got a blog and they've got a really jazzy title that really needs to grab attention, that might need transcreation, whereas the rest of the blog might just need a translation approach. You might need a mix of the two. So I think it's always best to be fluid. I think knowing the terms, but allowing some fluidity really. And I think making sure you've got a trusted partner to kind of who can advise you on these things and not either rip you off or make sure your content's not landing and isn't going to do anything for you. I think having some people to kind of really advise you is always really helpful.
Brilliant. Thank you, James. Well, that's it for questions. No more have come through. So without further ado, we'll end things there. Thank you so much to everyone for joining. As I mentioned, we will make sure that we circulate the recording, and it will be on our website in a week's or so's time. And if you have any transcreation needs, please do feel free to reach out to James or myself. We'll be more than happy to chat through any requirements you have. So that's final thoughts from me. Any from you, James?
No, thank you very much, everyone, for your questions. It's been a pleasure. So yeah, I look forward to, as Chris has said, please get in touch if you need any help, and yeah, it'll be available on our website. Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.